I think for many of you, our next speaker will need no introduction. Kate Ashbrook is the Chief Executive of the Open Spaces Society, and Kate is going to talk to us about putting people at the heart of policy making. Thank you, Kate.
Well, thank you, Ian, and just how wonderful it is to be back with everyone again. You know, we haven't had a Park Societies conference for some time now, and I haven't been to every single one, but it is just a joy to be with everybody, and a huge thanks to the North York Moors Association for taking on this task and producing such a great conference. So it's just lovely. This summer I was musing that, rather dreadfully, it's 50 years ago since I discovered Dartmoor, which kind of tells you something about my age. At least I must be more than 50. I'm going to tell my personal story because Ian told his, and actually I think everyone's got a personal story, but mine, very briefly, is I first went to Dartmoor for pony riding holidays at the age of 10. I kept going back and back. I loved the riding, and then one day we'd all been pestering the person who ran the pony place. You know, we want to do a long ride, and we'd been pestering her for some years, and eventually on the 26th of August 1971 we rode right across the moor from west to east. And that is so imprinted on my memory, that wonderful day. And I thought, this place is magic. It is wonderful. I just love it. But at the end of that day, we all got back to it. We left the ponies at a farm. And there was a meeting in Princetown. And so who wants to go to the meeting? Well, I put my hand up. So a few of us went on to Princetown that evening and sat in a crowded hall, smoky, I'm quite sure. And it was about putting a reservoir in the Swinkham Valley in central southern Dartmoor, a scheme that had been thrown out in 1970, and this was a year later, and the farmers were saying, hey, put it back at Swinkham, you know, don't take our agricultural land off the moor. And so there was a big row, and at that meeting this wonderful person stood up and spoke, and really spoke out for Dartmoor and said, you cannot destroy this wild valley, you know, it's a Philistine thing to do. That person was Silvia. And when I saw her, I thought, my God, I want to be like Silvia. You know, I think she's brilliant. And because the friend on the farm knew Silvia, I then met her the following year, and I followed her. I went to Exeter University to be near her. And I learnt my campaigning from Silvia. And Silvia was quite a campaigner. And she was a great campaigner. Here she is on Ringmore Down in 1968, where she had commoners' rights, and the military were doing their exercises, and she was proving that they couldn't stop her exercising her commoners' rights. Well, I don't think the right of photography is a commoners' right, but no matter about that. She was there, you know, digging her peat or whatever, and that's the kind of thing she did. You know, she was very brave, she was very forthright, very feisty, and our national parks had those people. At that time, you know, there was Esme Kirby in Snowdonia. There was Malcolm McEwen on Exmoor. There were the Haythornthwaites in the Peak District. There was Ken Wilson in the Yorkshire Dale. You know, every national park probably had one. That was a wonderful era of people who spoke out and fought. And I think, you know, we are the legacy from that. We've learnt from them, and we need to get back to those times. Landscapes. All of us love our landscapes. Each national park has its special qualities, and we know and love those. Whether we discovered them at a sort of clinch moment like I did, or whether you've grown up with them, those landscapes are incredibly important. But it's landscapes with people. People are part of that landscape, whether they are the farmers who work there, who own it, who graze it, whether it's the landowners, but also in particular it's the public, it's the people who visit. And back in 1949, well, this is actually earlier than that, but those are the pioneers of the national parks movement. You know, people who went out from government, went out and walked the Pennine Way as they're doing there, but they were understanding that national parks were for people. So in 1949, we were thinking of national parks as the National Health Service. You know, they were incredibly important to all of us. So ministers of those days recognised the value of our wild landscapes. And here is a very poor picture, but I just had to put this in. This is Clement Atlee, who was the Prime Minister at the time of the 1949 Act, with his wife Violet. Now, they're not in a national park, They are in an AONB, the Surrey Hills. The Home Secretary at that time, James Tutor Eade, who happened to be connected with my Open Spaces Society, restored the stepping stones across the River Mole near Dorking because they had got damaged during the war, and he complained about that, and Dorking Council said, OK, we'll replace them, but you must pay for them, Mr. Tutor Eade. Well, he did. He complained about the price, but he did pay for them. It was about £6,000 in today's money. And then they had an opening on the 11th of September 1946. Tutor Eade, being Home Secretary, brought the Prime Minister along to cross with Violet, and the waters had been very high until just about the day of the crossing. Violet was very nervous, but anyway, they got across. And afterwards they repaired to the local pub, and that's the interesting bit, because the Dorking Advertiser actually reported, as they did in those days, the speeches in full. So, you know, we had Tutor Eade speaking, we had Lawrence Chubb from my organisation, but we had the Prime Minister speaking about the wonders of walking in Surrey, the importance of the landscape, the state of the paths. Well, he said, you know, I walk quite a bit in Buckinghamshire, because he lived at Chequers, and he said, and the paths are great, but when I'm walking to neighbouring Oxfordshire, the farmers and landowners are telling me, get off our land. You know, he cared. He was the Prime Minister, and he was talking about walking and open country and access and beauty. And it is such an inspiration. You know, where are these people now, one wonders? And yet, giving people the right to enjoy something, we've always known, gives them a stake in the land, in the protection of the land. The Royal Commission on Common Land, here's a piece of common land in the South Downs, Blackdown, back in 1958 said the recognition of a universal right of public access to common land is moreover a guarantee of its inviolability. So people pressure is really important. And now I fear ministers have kind of lost all that. They've lost that message. I was recalling how in 2015, Rory Stewart, remember him as Environment Minister, actually made a most wonderful statement. He said, national parks are the soul of Britain. They are the centre of my imagination. And he went on to talk about the cultural, environmental, historic, farming, literature, history, you know, all that. And I think we haven't had anyone since Rory Stewart who has spoken out for national parks in that way. And of course we've got Natural England, who is there supposedly championing national parks and supposedly championing people, but struggling. The strategy of 2016, I think you probably were part of that, Andy, 2016, had a line putting people at the heart of the environment. But we never really saw that happen. Now in the 20 to 21, the strategy, there's connecting people with nature, and there are some fine aspirations. But does Natural England have the resources and the capacity? No. Does government want to take that on board? There's very little sign of it. You know, there may be a bit of talk, but where is the action? I mean, every policy statement for nature should have something about people in it. That's really what's needed. Nature and people should not be in different boxes. They need to come together so that people understand nature, and by understanding nature, people will want to fight for it. So, you know, our policies are too much in silos. The sort of frustration we're having at the minute is, as has been mentioned earlier, with the environmental land management schemes which are coming in, with CAP going and the basic payment and all that going, we're getting the new system. And there are 3 levels of grant. The sustainable farming incentive is the basic payment scheme, reborn. And then we've got local nature recovery and landscape recovery. And that is an opportunity to do something really positive. And government has said in the statements on the agriculture bill over and over again, you know, public access is a public good, which should be funded. We've got countless statements. But when you actually come to see what's happening, it's not happening. It's not in there, not yet. I mean, there is still time, but it's not yet in there as something that's paid for. More and better access. So improve what we have. You know, sort of example of a path across a field. That's the kind of thing that might be funded, because that is wider than the minimum width, which is required. If that's a footpath, it's wider than 1 metre, and it's a very pleasant route to walk. So that could be funded. the things that landowners should do anyway should not be funded, but some of the local authority stuff could be helping the local authorities. So putting routes where they're really going to help people, getting people off busy roads, providing safe crossings, being able to walk alongside rivers, all those things could be funded. And what's more, we need an enforcement system that ensures that if farmers and landowners in receipt of funds are not obeying the law on rights of way and on access, then their grant is docked, taken from them. So that would be a real incentive to obey the law. Our highway authorities, our park authorities who act for the highway authorities, are really hard pressed. We know that. We need to find ways of making it easier to get more and better access. And so it's a big frustration that government is just not rising to this and not fulfilling its promises. And yet we've had tests and trials of various sorts of the environmental land management payment, and particularly in the North Kent AONB, we've been testing access, and there the farmers are wanting to be paid for access, and it's all very positive, but government seems to be ignoring it. So big frustration, and fine words and no action. We do have, for the protected landscapes, the Farming in Protected Landscapes scheme, which apparently will fund access improvements. We've yet to see that. But will it fund them really where they're needed? Will it have the enforcement element to it? I doubt it. So it is a big frustration. And then, of course, there's the inequality of access. We know very well that in towns and cities that people of lower incomes, people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds have less opportunity to get to local green space. They have to cross busy roads, they have to suffer traffic and pollution. They are just basically less well off than many others. And the figures show that. So they have less access to green spaces in towns, but they also do, as we know, in our protected landscapes. And because of the difficulties of transport, particularly. So we know that there is inequality of access. And here I just love to show this, because this is me and Anne Robinson and me meeting up with the 100 Black Men Walking, run by Maxwell Iamba, a sort of chance visit on Edale Station. And that's great. Maxwell gets lots of people out into the park. He's absolutely terrific. And he's a legacy of CNP's Mosaic project, I have to say. And there are others, but they are very few. It's just very few. And yet we had Glover saying that we need new long-term programs to increase the diversity of visitors, greater freedom to roam rights, and the wonderful, eye-catching recommendation of every child should have a night under the stars. All very visionary and all completely bogged down somewhere in DEFRA, because DEFRA seems to have got obsessed by sorting out the National Landscape Service to the detriment of everything else, and it's just not doing anything as far as we can see on Glover. And yet the 25-year plan, which is the kind of touch point for the government, 2018, said that we will make sure that our natural environment can be enjoyed, used by and cared for by everyone, and high quality, accessible natural spaces are close to where people live and work. They promised that, but we haven't seen it. We've got the Environment Bill now in the House of Lords, where we tried to get targets for access, so that access was a legal statutory minimum, something to be provided, something to be enforced. Government would not accept the amendment, and when we wrote to Lord Goldsmith about that, we had complete flim-flam reply. It's all the things we are doing, except they're not really. And then eventually coming out with the fact that this is really about nature, and there could be conflicts. Getting back to that old argument about conflicts, but we've got to get over that. We absolutely have to get over that. We have to make sure that there is no conflict, that people understand nature and fight for it. And yes, there will be pinch points, yes, there will be difficulties, but listening yesterday at the Park Society's meeting to some of the work that's going on in the parks about dealing with the visitor pressure, I think there are definite ways of dealing with that, and I hope others will talk about that during the session, because it's really interesting. But we mustn't assume, therefore, that that's going to be the problem that we're faced with, and therefore we can't move forward. Comprehensive spending review, which Tom mentioned, the government did set up this thing called the Agnew Commission, which called on government departments to develop a programme of work to deliver a significant improvement in using greater or more targeted access to outdoor spaces to support better outcomes for physical and mental health. That was a very well kept secret. I think there was one Natural England roundtable on that. It isn't a commission that's called for evidence or invited people to come and talk to it or gone out, as far as I can see, and looked. I don't really know what it's doing. It's encouraging that Treasury is trying to get DEFRA to do something about access, put money and effort into access. It is encouraging, but I'm not sure where it's leading, because quite honestly nobody's been able to get very much out of that. I mean, we do in fact need ministers who are dedicated to access, ministers who are dedicated to protected landscapes. And the problem with DEFRA at the moment and for some time has been, with the whole Brexit thing, DEFRA staff have not stayed put for any time. Their roles have changed. They've moved back and forth. They've moved out, a lot of them. We've lost expertise and we've lost interest. And although civil servants probably are more interested than the ministers, it's still, a tough fight. Now, I've been talking about England, and that's remiss, so I'll put up a picture of Wales and say that I think it is better in Wales. I don't have a lot of information, and I would love to hear from Welsh colleagues about this, but I think, although it hasn't been said very publicly, I think the agriculture bill in Wales is looking to fund access. I'm even told it's looking to fund permanent access, which is, of course, what it should be, public money for public goods that remain and don't just disappear when the money ends. I also think that they may be looking at enforcement for grant receivers who do not obey the law. I think it's very interesting that in Wales the Minister for Climate Change is responsible for national park, protected landscapes and access. I think that's a really interesting combination. And I do think that ministers in Wales personally take more interest in these issues. And Lee Waters, for instance, his work on transport and access is already proving, very encouraging. I'm not talking from a position of great knowledge, so I'd love to hear more about that. But I didn't want you to think that I only think about England, because I don't. I think Wales is glorious, and I think it also, in so many times, it shows the way to the rest of us, and I hope it's going to on protected landscapes and access as well. But really, my main theme is that this is about people, and also that we have been in the doldrums. This is the walk we did on the 70th anniversary of the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act in Castleton in March 2019, which was the most wonderful event, and lots of people came out and celebrated. And I put that up because the blind lady is called Marika Kovacs, and just a personal thing, I met her. She lives in Hereford, actually, but we walk together a lot. And she has taught me so much about looking and seeing and listening. I can recommend to everybody, walk with a blind person. It changes your perception. And there she is, brave girl. Nothing puts her off. She'll go anywhere. And the 70th anniversary, a great event. And here, that's the 125th anniversary last month of the Winter Hill mass trespass in Bolton. Loads of people turned out. So there are people who really want to turn out, but I'm concerned that we've been drifting. I know COVID is a very good reason to have drifted, and of course, things have been different, but we're kind of coming out of that, hopefully, and our protected landscapes have never needed us more. I've been hearing over the last day, of all the issues, particularly road threats, forestry threats, housing threats. There is so much that is just carrying on regardless of the protected landscape boundary. So I think we do need to rekindle that 1939 Act spirit. I think we do need to work together as national park societies. It's just there is so much expertise and professionalism and brilliance in the park societies, and there's emotion as well. This isn't a clinical thing. There's emotion and caring and love, which is all so important. So we can give a message that no one else can give for our protected landscapes, and then for the family. And of course, CNP is the organisation we look to champion the family. And it's lovely to have you here, Rose, new chief exec, and it's lovely to have, all CNP staff here. And I know how hard they've all been, working all through the COVID period and kept flying the flag. But now we need to fly the flag so much higher and so much louder. And we do need to build that new movement. And it's, as I said yesterday, you know, Waiting for Glover, as it's now, you know, the new play, Waiting for Glover. Don't let's wait for Glover. We can't just wait for Glover, because when it comes out, when the government responds, it's going to be crap, isn't it? It's going to be a consultation on a national landscape service or something like that. We actually need to put down our points, what we want from this, what we want for the future of our protected landscapes. And then we all need to argue together for those points, but we also need to think of ways of building this movement so that we get this great rally of people. You know, we can't hang about now. We've just got to find all the ways of saying how important the protected landscapes, and for us especially our national parks, are for the health and well-being of the nation. That's what it is. It's our survival, isn't it? And all that they can do to meet the climate crisis, to mitigate, to promote, you know, they must be at the forefront of that. And that is the great opportunity with COP26 for national parks to show, you know, what we can do as national parks. We work with the authorities, but we keep our distance. With the Ginger Group, you know, we're the critical friend. We can speak where the park authorities can't. And we must do that. We must be brave. We must be feisty. You know, just as those wonderful Silvia Sayers and Esme Kirby's were, we must speak out. We must grab the headlines. So I'm going to close with a picture of my beloved Dartmoor and a quote from Nelson Mandela, who said, "Vision without action is just a dream. Action without vision just passes the time. But vision with action can change the world." Well, we need to change our world. I believe we've got the vision, so now let's have the action. Thank you.